In this video on management and cost accounting, we will be discussing the classifications of cost. What we have learned so far is that cost accounting is the branch of accounting that deals with the study of costs and methods to reduce costs. So it's very important for us to identify what are the different types of costs that we have in a firm. There are many bases to classifications of costs. Depending on different types, different categories, costs can be classified into many. We will be discussing some important classifications of costs in this video. The first classification that we would be talking about is based on identifiability. Based on how quickly or how effectively you're able to trace the cost, cost can be broadly classified into two. You have direct cost, you have indirect cost. When we are able to pinpoint or identify the cost and say, this is the exact amount of money that we have incurred for this particular activity, such kind of costs are called as direct costs. Indirect costs that are incurred, but you're not able to identify, such kind of costs are referred to as indirect costs. We can talk about an example for this. Let's say you go to the tailor and you ask the tailor to make a shirt for you. The tailor would suggest to stitch this shirt, you might be needing so many meters of cloth. So the so many meters of cloth that is suggested by the tailor is the direct cost that you have incurred. But along with the cloth, the tailor might be needing buttons, thread, etc. So all those are examples of indirect cost. Based on levels of activity in your organization, there are three types of cost: fixed, variable, semi-variable. When the cost remains the same, irrespective of the level of activity that you carry out, such kind of costs are called as fixed cost. If the cost changes with the level of activity carried out, such kind of costs are called as variable cost. When a portion of the cost is fixed and the portion is variable, such kind of costs are called as semi-variable cost. Let's talk about this with an example. The rent that you pay for your factory premises would be an example of fixed cost, because whether you produce 1 unit or whether you produce 10,000 units, the factory rent would remain the same. But the raw materials that you would be consuming in your factory would depend on the level of activity. If you produce less, you need less raw material. If you produce more, you need more raw material. That's an example of variable cost. Now, there are some costs where a portion of it is fixed, but a portion would change with the level of activity. A best example would be the compensation that you pay to the people working in sales. They would have a fixed component in their salary that, irrespective of how many products they sell, that has to be paid out. But then you might have a performance-based pay that would be paid based on the level of sales that is carried out by the sales executive. That's an example of semi-variable cost. The next classification is based on control. So based on control, we have controllable cost, non-controllable cost. If the management is able to exert some level of control over the cost, such kind of costs are called as controllable cost. But if the cost cannot be controlled or it cannot be managed, then it is referred to as non-controllable cost. So let's talk about an example. The quality of the raw material that you buy is something which the management can manage. But there are some statutory fee, taxes, etc. that is decided by the external agencies, and the management may not have a say on this. So these are examples of non-controllable cost. The next classification is based on time. The amount of time that you need to understand and determine the cost. We have two types: historical cost, predetermined cost. If the cost can be ascertained only after the occurrence, that is called as historical cost. But if you are able to anticipate the cost even before the activity, such kind of costs are called as predetermined cost. Let's say you walk into a hotel and the menu does not state the prices of the dishes that you are ordering. That's an example of historical cost, because you will come to know the total bill only when the waiter comes back, when you're done dining. But let's say you're trying to order some food from Swiggy, you have to pay the amount in advance. That would be an example of predetermined cost. Based on normality, we have two types: normal, abnormal. When the costs are usual for a certain level of activity, it is referred to as normal cost. But let's say you incur a cost by suspense, by surprise, such kind of costs are called as abnormal cost. Let's talk about an example for this. The cost of raw material is a normal cost. But let's say machinery broke down, now you have to carry out repair activities. That's an example of an abnormal cost. Now, based on the decision makings that are carried out, we have some special costs which are computed, and these are strictly for the purpose of decision making. So, calculation of these costs would help you to ensure that your business is taking better decisions. So, we will be discussing 5 costs over here: sunk cost, replacement cost, differential cost, imputed cost, conversion cost. Let's talk about these costs one by one. So sunk cost is a cost that is already incurred by the firm, but now you have to write it off. A best example for this would be a market study that is being carried out. However, your product has failed. Now that your product has failed, there is no way by which you can recover this amount of money back. So such kind of costs are called as sunk costs. So sunk costs are usually which are written off and you have no means to recoup and get this money back. The next is replacement cost. So replacement cost refers to the market cost that you incur in changing an asset in a firm. Let's say until now you were carrying out labor intrinsic methods of production. All of a sudden you decide to switch over to machine intrinsic modes of production. That's an example of replacement cost. The next decision-making cost that we will be talking about is differential cost. This is also referred to as incremental cost. Because of a change in the process or methodology that you follow in carrying out your activity, the changes in the cost that you incur is referred to as differential cost. Now, differential cost can be an increase or it can be a decrease. Let's talk about an example. Before COVID, when you visit a salon for a haircut, they would be charging us you a certain amount of money. But during COVID, what used to happen was because the barber is forced to use a lot of disposable accessories, they would end up charging you an extra amount of money. That would be an example of differential cost. Next is referred to as imputed costs. Imputed costs are also referred to as notional costs. These are costs that you calculate only for the purpose of decision making. So in other words, these are hypothetical costs to ensure that your calculations are in place. Let's talk about this with an example. Imagine you are running your manufacturing unit out of your own premises. You are not required to pay rent. However, in order to ensure that your calculations in terms of determining the cost of the product is intact, you include a rent. So that rent is a notional amount that you're including for your calculation. This would be an example of a notional cost. The final cost that we will be talking about is the conversion cost. So conversion cost refers to the cost that you incur in converting the raw material into finished goods. So here it's the sum total of all the labor, all the factory expenses that you incur in rolling out your finished product. So this is what is referred to as the this is conversion cost. So in this particular video, we have spoken about the different classifications of cost. I hope this video has been enriching for all of you. Happy learning.